Help your community explore new worlds and ideas. Support your Teamster Local Drive Fund. The key is to be found in the character of the men themselves. The men were not of the mining population, familiar to the coal fields, but of the characteristic frontiersman type, come not so much to find work as to seek a fortune. Rough, ready, fearless, used to shifting for themselves, shrewd, full of expedients, reckless, ready to cast everything on a single die. They were not the kind of men to be caught napping, or to be turned from their purpose until every possible resource had been tried. They would act quickly, shrewdly, and effectively, withal straightforwardly, but with small respect for authority and none too much for the law. Benjamin McKee Restall.
From the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, everything from niceties to necessities have been delivered to us wherever we may roam, courtesy of the men who drive. From horse-drawn wagons to 18-wheelers, the Colorado Teamsters hauled everything that made Western migration possible. By 1859, hundreds of thousands of people had begun migrating west. And on January 1st, 1876, Colorado gained statehood. 11 years later, Colorado passed a law recognizing Labor Day, a holiday observed on the first Monday in September.
In 1889, the first organized Teamsters were evident as part of the Denver Brewers Workers Union, which included coppers, engineers, firemen, and Teamsters who worked in and around the breweries. Their chant could be heard in the saloons of Denver. Solidarity, man for man, from roof to cellar, all for each and each for all. This alone can secure our future.
soul risen with pain, a ghost afraid to cross. I made a deal with the devil that before I die I'd see the rain. Lord, you are my friend, a heart blackened with sin. I've been dancing with you for a long time, so before we begin, you, my friend, oh, you will see the light. The grass will wither, your soul will fade to the night. A captive soul, release me in the rain. Take this burden, oh, you will hold.
3 wagon roads led into the district, from Divide on the north, from Colorado Springs on the east, and from Canyon City on the south. Along these roads, night and day passed heavy trucks drawn by 6 and 8 horses, bringing into camp provisions and building material and machinery, or leaving with loads of ore for the smelters. The social conditions of the region were those usual in an unsettled mining community. Life at the camp was generally rough. Men were many and women were few. Saloons and dance halls were numerous.
At the turn of the 20th century, before organized labor, the typical Teamster worked an average of 12 to 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, for about $2 a day. Work was hard to come by, and destitution was always at hand because the haulers assumed all the risks of delivering goods without support from anyone when things didn't go as planned. The Colorado labor wars raged from 1894 through 1904 and marked 10 years of unrest between labor and capital. As demands on workers increased, but pay did not, the war on workers had begun.
The strike was called November 9, 1903. The demand was for an 8-hour day, a check weighman representing the miners, payment in money instead of scrip. The whole state of Colorado was in revolt. Much of the fighting took place around Cripple Creek. The miners were evicted from their company-owned houses. They went out on the bleak mountainsides, lived in tents through a terrible winter with the temperature below zero, with 18 inches of snow on the ground. They tied their feet in gunny sacks and lived lean and lank and hungry as timber wolves. One Saturday night, I got tipped off by the post office master that the militia were going to raid the little tent colony in the early morning. Between 4:30 and 5 o'clock in the morning, I heard the tramp of feet on the road and saw about 45 deputies. They descended upon the sleeping tent colony, dragged the miners out of their beds. They were beaten along the road by guns. They were driven like cattle, packed in a boxcar and run down to the county seat and put in jail. Not one law had these miners broken. Their crime was that they had struck against the power of gold. All civil law had broken down in the Cripple Creek strike. The militia said, "We are under orders only from God and Governor Peabody." Habeas corpus proceedings were completely suspended. Free speech and assembly were forbidden. People spoke in whispers, as in the days of the Inquisition. Soldiers committed outrages. Strikers were arrested for vagrancy and worked in chain gangs on the street under brutal soldiers. Men, women, and tiny children were packed in the bullpen at Cripple Creek. Miners were shot dead as they slept. They were ridden from the country, their families knowing not where they had gone or whether they lived. Organizers were thrown into jail and held without trial for months. They were deported, landed in the desert, 30 miles from food or water. If deported men returned, they were immediately arrested by the militia and put in jail. The military had no regard for human life. They were sanctified cannibals. Is it any wonder that we have murders and holdups when the youth of the land is trained by the great industrialists to a belief in force, when they see that the possession of money puts one above law? Autobiography of Mother Jones.
In the history books is it lasted from when the call came out on September 23rd, 1913, until the following spring, April 20th, 1914. That's when the very well-known Ludlow Massacre actually occurred. First and foremost was the recognition of the Union. Part of the reasons for the strike, the sixth demand, was basically to get out of the isolation of the company towns that the miners and their families lived in. They were almost trapped, in a sense, in a lot of these towns because of the form of money that they were given for payment. It was called script, which it was only good in these company towns, so that's what they paid their rent with. Once the strike was called and these miners were still living in these company homes, they were evicted. Teamsters and their sort of passion to get involved in the union activities and supporting like-minded workers in that same goal. I think everyone worked together very collaboratively to support the idea of these strikes and to live in these tent colonies, to continue the strike, to continue to show the CF&I that they were indeed serious about these demands and they wanted them to be met. CF&I's hired detectives, the Baldwin Felts detectives, sort of thugs, if you will. They used this ironclad vehicle with a machine gun mounted to the top of it to ride around the Ludlow tent colony, harassing the striking miners and their families. The militia and the hired guards by the CF&I tended to use their harassing techniques there more than other camps, and they had surrounded the Ludlow colony at 10:01 a.m. exactly. Somebody started shooting. That first shot that went off in the morning, the entire day was filled with firefight. The militia had different kinds of weaponry. The miners had basically simple weapons, pistols, their 30-30 Winchester rifles. And as firefight continued throughout the day, an engineer who was passing by in his train noticed what was happening. He saw the women and children sort of scattering and trying to take cover from all of the rain of bullets. He actually slowed the train to a crawl, so a lot of these women and children could actually get on it and be taken to safety. I believe he ended up stopping down in Pueblo. Tychus took a white handkerchief, and in terms of trying to end the situation and seek peace, he sought out Linderfelt. Linderfelt ended up shooting Tychus in the back. And towards the evening, the tent colony caught on fire. When the Red Cross started to arrive to help a lot of these people, it was just skeletons of bed frames. It was stoves sort of tipped over in these areas. Nothing was left except for burned ground. The numbers of the death are for sure known on the side of the striking miners. It is 19. Louis Tychus included in that number, and tragically there were 2 women and 11 children who were killed that day. They were found in an underground cellar that was dug under these tents as a form of protection, and it was later identified that these children and these 2 women had died of acute asphyxiation. One young boy was shot by a stray bullet that day. The baby killers is what the militia and the CF&I detectives were called. And so you have this immediate response to a tragedy that not only included the loss of life of these strikers and some militiamen, but also women and children. They heard that Louis Tychus had been killed. They heard about these women and children that had been killed. And they essentially went on a war. The 10 Days War, it said that it started the day following the massacre. So on April 21st, a lot of the striking miners during April 20th, on the day of the massacre, regrouped. They took the town of Trinidad, and that's why it's compared to a war, because they essentially went into Trinidad, occupied the area, drove out the militia, drove out the Baldwin Felts who were living in a hotel. and see a miner on every corner with his .30-30 rifle and a red bandana tied around his neck. The red bandana, like the Winchester .30-30 rifle, sort of became a piece of identification for a lot of these miners. The bandana itself almost became sort of a sense of pride for a lot of these miners, especially during the 10 Days War. There are a lot of photographs of these miners, many of them in the town of Trinidad, and in these photographs you can see them standing with this signature rifle, and many of them have the red bandanas around their necks. And it's an interesting turn from how the bandana started to being such a signature piece of solidarity. The leader of the Company B in the militia, Lieutenant Linderfelt, he actually used to go so far as to call a lot of the strikers goddamn dirty dagos and rednecks. And it always appeared with that statement they were backwoods people or something of that nature. But the rednecks came from the tendency for them to wear these bandanas around their necks. So from something that was negative in the beginning with the militia sort of saying that's a negative stigma or negative identification, they turned it to be a positive, to be something that they sort of rallied. It was almost like a uniform that they had, these red bandanas. The funeral for the children who were lost was shortly after the massacre itself, during the time of the 10 Days War. And there's a lot of well-known pictures and well-documented pictures of that event. It took place in Trinidad at the Holy Trinity Church. And some of the photographs, you can see a wagon probably pulled by a group of Teamsters. On this wagon, you see in this photograph the little white coffins. And those photographs were published and shown to the media, and it really got a lot of people more involved with the situation. Shortly after their funeral, you have the huge, huge event of the funeral of Louis Tychus, which there are also photographs supporting that funeral, and lines of miners that came from southern Colorado. Many came from up in northern Colorado. I'm sure there were many supporters who came from out of state just for this funeral, and these photographs document it. There are about 3 different photographs of the procession line of these men all dressed in their black suits.
And there are no more saints here, and pray just one more time this fire to fuel the flame.
Tychus is buried, which is on the western side of town. The procession essentially turns back around, and for miles these men walk in complete silence for this funeral. And those 2 major events and the deaths of Tychus and those children got the word out to the nation about what was happening in southern Colorado. And there was, in fact, a war, and a lot of people were losing their lives unjustly.
Congress responded to public outcry by directing the House Committee on Mines and Mining to investigate the Ludlow incident. Its report in 1915 was influential in promoting child labor laws and an 8-hour workday nationwide. From 1910 to 1914, the United Mine Workers in the northern Colorado coalfields were in the midst of a strike for better working conditions, hours, and pay. When the Union men walked out on the Hecla mine northeast of Louisville, the company hired the Baldwin Phelps Detective Agency to guard the mine compound, the same thugs who surrounded Ludlow. A machine gun and spotlight were placed in a tower on the Hecla property and randomly fired into the town. During labor conflicts, many citizens found safety in dirt basements to avoid being hit by stray bullets fired from the mine compound into the city. Throughout World War I, Teamsters overseas helped secure our troops by keeping them, as well as the trucks and supplies, moving swiftly and safely from ports to battle line. Meanwhile, the Teamsters Union continued to grow in Colorado. The coal strike of 1927 and 1928 is considered one of the most successful in Colorado labor history, increasing wages in the state at $1 an hour, but it came with a price in human life. CF&I officials and other corporations had been pressuring Governor Billy Adams to call out the National Guard and reel in strikers. The governor commanded a former Army Captain, Lewis Scherf, who had been an assistant of Colonel Pat Hamrock during the Ludlow Massacre, to send in the troops. Without official orders, Scherf and some men under his command went north to the Columbine mine near the town of Louisville, where a strike was ongoing. And on November 21st, Monday morning at 5:30 a.m., with a crowd of about 400 strikers and sympathizers, including some 50 women, Scherf and his men began provoking the unarmed strikers. Words were exchanged, followed by tear gas, and rocks were hurled. Scherf fired 2 shots in the air. Then came a rifle volley from state police and fire from machine guns mounted above the mine head. 5 men were killed instantly and a 6th critically wounded. The workers and their supporters suffered greatly in their fight to unionize. Teamster union representation led directly to better working conditions, including shorter work weeks, the right to overtime pay, and standardized contracts for all workers, including women and minorities. After the catastrophic stock market crash of 1929, President Franklin D. Roosevelt was able to win passage of the National Labor Relations Act, establishing minimum wages and maximum hours of labor for each industry. The new law finally gave workers the right to collective bargaining. American workers were now legally protected from intimidation and interference aimed at union activities. By 1942, 125,000 Teamsters were in military operations for the Allied forces. The Allied victory would not have been possible without the Teamsters, who transported troops and engaged in everything from building the Burma Road to landing on the beaches of Normandy. Just as they did during the First War, women served their country by taking on the jobs their male counterparts left behind and proving they could hold their own in any work setting.
I heard on the radio they was carrying a flag up there. I saw the first flag go up at about 10:35 in the morning on the 23rd of February.
Local 452 was attempting to organize the workers, not at the brewery, but at the ceramics factory that they had. And so he was supposed to speak to a bunch of the Coors workers in a meeting hall there in Golden. Well, he went out there and lo and behold, the building was being picketed by a lot of students at Mines. Came out to say, that they were opposed to Teamsters, and the Teamsters were a bunch of crooks and so on and so forth. Well, Hoffa went in and began talking, and these kids were making a lot of noise outside, so he told the people that were at the door to let them in. And so they came in and they asked a few questions, and he quieted them down, and then he started to talk to them about the real issue, which is the haves and the have-nots. And before you know it, where these kids had thrown their picket signs on the floor, and one of them was standing as he was addressing Hoffa with a question. It was an amazing turnaround for those kids. I think they really learned something that day.
The Teamsters Union is one of the most diverse organizations in the United States. We represent 1.4 million members in just about any organization and craft that we have. You name it, we're probably there, and we're probably representing those members.
My greatest memory as a Teamster was organizing down in Grand Junction about 5 years ago, maybe 4, winning the first campaign for First Student Bus Company, just to be able to have those people better their lives by gaining a contract.
Lift me up, you my friend, oh, you will see the light.
The more union members we have, of course, the better off everyone will be. That's what sets the standard wage for the community.
What the Teamsters do is that we engage in community activities in support of our membership to help them in the collective bargaining process, which is so very important to our rank and file and to other unions as well.
My company came to me and made some changes that we didn't feel were fair. We suffered about a 20% wage reduction, which in the end, through the union's help, we ended up getting all of our back pay to the tune of about $150,000.
You always hear about the Teamsters coming in, as we're one of the most supportive organizations in America.
Through education, it's a long process, but it's a process that is very well needed. Without education, no one is going to know what we really are and who we really are.
An actual war on workers' rights, we have to be ready to stand up against that, and that means having to actively be involved politically. We have to have our members engaged. We have to have them contributing. These employers are going to come up with massive amounts of money. Well, we have the people, and I think the people are the most important. We are able to generate, and have always been able to generate, the members on the field and be able to put the boots on the ground, knocking on the doors, getting out the vote, getting people elected.
The Teamsters, proud working men and women who have fought hard for everything that they deserve: health care, pension, job protection, seniority, and it's a way of life.
Tell me, Mountain, how old are you? How many years did it take for you to rise up and break on through? Tell me, Mountain, what will it take before the weight of the world on the bow makes the bow break? Tell me, mountain, what shall we do? Become as old and as wise as you. Tell me, mountain, all of your might, what will it take to make a man leave this place without a fight? Tell me, mountain, how old are you? And how many years does it take for man to rise up and break on through? Tell me, mountain, what will it take before the weight of the world on the bow makes the